Hello, I'm Stephan Schwartz. It's a pleasure to welcome you to Schwartz Report. Today, I want to dig into something that has really begun to bother me and it ought to bother you too. I've been doing a lot of research about American healthcare, and as I've dug into it, several things have emerged that become clear. Things that I hadn't really fully appreciated, and perhaps you haven't either. One is that red states just have, as they do in almost every other social outcome data, they are inferior to blue states, their social outcome data. Now, I know that sounds very partisan, but that isn't how I mean it, and that's not what I'm interested in. What I care about is objectively verifiable data. That is, things you can prove to be true, not things you're talking about or projecting about or politicizing about, but what actually happens. And so if you look at this, one thing that comes out very clearly is the inferiority of red states compared to blue states for their health care. But what has really got me going is life expectancy. I mean, literally, how long you live. And not just in red states, but in the United States in general. And I have been very surprised at what I have discovered. So that's what I want to share with you this week. From the 1960s well into the 2000s, each generation could expect that they would, in fact, live longer than their parents. There has been a general increase in life expectancy. But then about 2020, it started reversing, and there was a drop of 1.5 years. And this decline continued from about 2019 to 2021. It fell by 2.7 years, down to 76.1 years. Now, that's the general national life expectancy. And you can look at this chart and see this precipitous fall. Now, of course, some of it was due to the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's not just that. And that's what surprised me. It's gone back up a little bit, but to quote Elizabeth Arias, who was the director of the study at the Center for Disease Control that did the study, they showed that life expectancy at birth in 2023 is for both sexes 76.4. This for people born this year. Males 73.5. Females 79.3. Well, okay, that's interesting, the difference between males and females. But that isn't really what struck me as I got into this. The difference that really got me was the significant difference, almost half a decade, between most of the rest of the developed world and the United States. We're not in the top 12 states in terms of life expectancy, nations in terms of life expectancy, or in the 24th position or the 36th. We are, in fact, in 47th position out of 201 nations and communities around the world. Now think about that. The people of the richest nation in the world have a lower life expectancy than, for instance, people who live in the Maldives or in Kuwait. Maldives 81.7, Kuwait 80.45, or the Czech Republic 79.82. This is really quite startling. Why is it that Americans don't live as long as people in most of the other developed nations? We're at 47th position. And when looks at this data, another reality begins to emerge that you almost never hear discussed. And that's just how bad the American healthcare system is. We have this illness profit system in which the function of the health system is not to produce well-being, it's to produce profit. Now, I've written about this in a number of places. You can go to academia.edu and search on my name, Stephan Schwartz, and you'll find hundreds of papers that I've written about these kinds of things. Because I really find the American illness profit system to be a national disgrace. It's a disaster. And I want to be very precise here. I am not talking about the doctors and the nurses and the other medical personnel. They are working so hard that the central thing that comes out of studying the medical staff is that they're burning out. Doctors and nurses simply leaving the profession because they're just burnt out, they're tired. What's inferior and what isn't working is the way the system is structured. The LITM Institute in London ranks all the healthcare systems of the world by nation. And when you look at what they rank, we come in 69th. Not only do we not live as long as Americans, but the quality of our healthcare system is so low that we're not even in the top 50. We're 69th. And as strange as that is, when you look at the expense, which is the other side of it, it becomes clear something is seriously wrong, because we are absurdly the most expensive healthcare system in the world. Look at this chart. The United States, $12,914 per capita. This is in 2021. Last year, I could get this kind of data. $12,914 per person per year. Whereas, for instance, in France, which has one of the best healthcare systems in the world, it's $6,115. Or Germany, Switzerland, Netherlands, Austria, Sweden. You see, it runs about $6,000, $7,000, while we are $12,000, almost $13,000 really, and we're coming in 69th. When you get into it and you really look at it, what you see is that the United States is a leader in the development of medical technologies, but it's very poor in getting those technologies into the American healthcare system to the benefit of American people. And the reason for this is politics. As you dig into this, what you see is that there is this red-blue life expectancy divide and healthcare. And you also see that we are increasingly becoming two countries in one nation. Life expectancy is heavily influenced also by historical culture, and I had not realized that. But the way various parts of the country were founded continue culturally to affect the well-being of the people who live in those states. And in red states, it's not anywhere near as good as it is in blue states. For instance, On paper, Lexington County, South Carolina, and Placer County, California, have a lot in common. They're big, they're wealthy, they're suburban counties with white supermajorities that border on their respective states' capital cities. They're both in the vanguard of their states' 20th century Republican advances. But the differences between the two is extraordinary. It's so great that the poorest set of counties in predominantly blue Yankee Northeast part of the United States have a higher life expectancy than the wealthiest parts of the Deep South. So this is not a money issue. It's not money per se. At a population level, a difference of 5 years is like the gap separating the United States from decidedly unwealthy countries like Mongolia or Belarus or Libya. Or 6 years, which is what it almost is, gets you to impoverished El Salvador. And digging even deeper, it becomes clear that the long-established cultures of the red and blue areas are a significant factor in these differences. Nobody ever talks about this. I could hardly find anything written about it. Outside of the academic, that's in the general media. The only place you really see anything about this is in the academic scientific world, because the corporate media just never talks about it. And few Americans have much sense of how the area culture began, nor much knowledge about how they have evolved since wherever it is they live was founded. For instance, Louisiana was founded by slave owners with a brittle racist idea of society, and that it endures to today. Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers who believed in community well-being, and the state still reflects that. They produce very different cultures. So this issue is not only politics, but the politics of culture. Nationhood Lab at Sal Regina University's Pell Center dug into this in great depth and said, and I want to quote them here, "We thought this might just be a reflection of wealth. Some American regions have always had higher standards of living than others because of their cultural values and the relative importance they place on the common good. And from their arrival in the late 17th century, the Deep South oligarchy didn't care and value shared prosperity, public education, or ordinary people's participation in public affairs. Whereas Yankeedom's Puritan founders valued all three of those things. Urbanized New Netherlanders, inhabitants of Dutch-founded areas around New York, couldn't avoid realizing their dependency on shared infrastructure, while the Scots and the Scotch-Irish founders of Greater Appalachia had historic reasons for equating government with tyranny. And as a result, a much greater share of people are poor in the Deep South and in Greater Appalachia than in Yankeedom or New Netherland. I just had not fully appreciated that these cultural beginnings of these areas in the United States have endured through the centuries and still affect these areas. Your health is only about 10% influenced by the medical environment you're in, and maybe 20 or 30% the behavioral choices you personally make, your exercise, your diet, whether you meditate, that sort of thing. But the social and political determinants of health are overwhelming. So to keep this in perspective, in the blue region in where I live, the life expectancy is 81.6 years. For someone living in southern Louisiana, in what they call the New France area around New Orleans, it's 75.7. That's a difference of 5.9 years. Now think about that. What have you done in your life in the last 5.9 years? Would you like another 5.9 years? Well, it depends on where you live. According to a publication in the Journal of the American Medical Association, life expectancy in industrialized countries has lengthened over the past century, but increases in life expectancy ceased in the United States after 2010. But what really stood out when I was reading this paper was that this lack of standards that the rest of the world enjoys, what really stood out for me was pediatric mortality. That is, children. Our children don't live as long as other children when things go wrong with them. So this deadly difference is one of the manifestations of the Great Schism trend. As I said at the beginning, we have become a single nation, but within that nation are two countries. And one of them is going in the wrong direction. Republican governance is always inferior. And the reason, I think, is that that's because they're not really interested in well-being. They're interested in power and profit and protecting the advantages that the uber rich have, and that the money that they give to the Republicans particularly, because as a result of Citizens United, we have this terrifically bad corruption. Almost every day I see stories about corruption of corporations that are paying off individual politicians or agencies or causing the laws to be written in a certain way, or Supreme Court justices who are beholden to billionaires. It just goes on and on. So what are we going to do about this? Because that, it seems to me, is the real problem. And the answer, I think, is we have to create a national, universal, birthright, single-payer healthcare system. Basically what all the rest of these developed nations have got, and why they are doing so much better than we are, and yet are paying so much less. Now, culture is a manifestation of consciousness. Culture changes occur through the amassment of individual experiences. That's why certain sports are more popular in some countries than in others. It's a personal choice individuals make. That's why the program, I think, has got to be national. We have got to create this national, universal, birthright, single-payer healthcare system, and we have to create a system that is equitably distributed throughout the country. Because right now, as I have discussed before here, we have medical deserts, particularly after the post-Dobbs Supreme Court decision. In some red states, it's now so difficult for a woman to get pregnancy health care or just female health care because the OBGYNs have left because of the way the laws have been written. So the only way this is going to change if it's changed by citizen action. We as a country, as a people, have got to decide whether well-being is the function of our government or whether making a few people extremely rich is the point. We cannot continue in the way we have been going because it is not working. You can talk about this in any number of ways, but what I've been talking about today, because it struck me so strongly, is that Americans don't even live as long as people in other countries. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to having another 6 years of life. And yet I see in so many circumstances and situations that just Americans don't get that. They die so much earlier than the people in other countries. Does that work for you? It certainly doesn't work for me. The way we're going to have to do this is by voting. That's why democracy is important. We need to vote. And we need to vote, and I'm sorry to say this, we need to vote only for Democrats. Democrats are not perfect. They have all kinds of problems. I know that. You know that. But there is a difference. Democrats in general do try to foster well-being. And the question I guess I leave you with is, does well-being matter to you? Are you prepared to stand up and do something about that? Are you planning in the 24 election to vote to foster well-being? I certainly hope so, because we're not doing well, and we can, and we should, and we can do this. The question is, are we really willing to make it happen? Your choice. Thank you.